Empathy. I think we need to make empathy cool again. So, the other day I was watching a video of this Georgian policewoman, and she was talking about an experience where she'd gone to McDonald's and ordered a meal and a coffee. And they made a mistake with her meal, and it took like 20 minutes, and they forgot her meal and they just offered her a coffee. And she was quite upset by this time with all this uncharacteristic delay, and she refused the coffee, and she went off to her car and she recorded this video talking about this experience, and she burst into tears. And as soon as I saw this, I immediately felt huge sympathy for her, what she was going through, because I could imagine what it would be like to be in her situation and what she was going through. Now, I then went to look at the comments of this video, and I was expecting that a lot of other people would be like me, that they would share my sympathy for this policewoman, but I was astonished. I couldn't actually find any positive one. I read about 50 or so comments, and I could not find any comments that had a positive interpretation of the video about this policewoman. Just to give you an idea of some of the things. I'm surprised you didn't shoot and then call for backup on this one. My eyes can't roll back any further. They just can't. Oh please, white people always crying for no reason. Who the F cares, Officer Karen? And crying over food taking too long. These are actually some of the nicer ones. they were awful, absolutely disgusting. These comments, and they just went on and on and on, and some of them got like 872 likes, 260, like 300 likes. They got a lot of likes for these comments, and I found myself thinking, when did it become cool to not have empathy? And I did a few little internet searches for this, and I found a few articles. I do intend to actually look into some of these with more depth and maybe do other videos on them, but just the summary of some of these things, or articles were written years ago, saying that there is a decline in empathy in children, that children are showing less ability to empathize with other people. There was another literary study saying that we're using less words for emotions over the last 150 years, and that people who read tend to have more empathy, but people don't read books anymore. And so they suspect that there's a drop in empathy and so on. And it was like, oh, wow, this seems like a very widespread belief out there. And there may even be some scientific data to back this up, that we are becoming less empathetic. And I found myself thinking that I've noticed several times in comedies over the years that there is this trope where a person will make this really nasty, vicious, fallacious insult against the antagonist of the story, and they play the laughing track. And that they'll say something really cruel, mean, foul-mouthed, and they play the laughing track. So that this guy or girl, who often a girl actually, when I think about that, some of the comedies I've seen, where they say this really nasty, rude thing, and it's funny. And what they're saying there, subtly, by saying that's funny, is that it's cool to insult people. It's cool to make fun of them, to lie about them, to joke about them. That's kind of like, it's cool not to empathize. It's cool not to see their point of view. It's cool not to understand them. The cool thing to do is to not understand people and burn your bridges with them. And that's worried me a few times in the past. And mind you, when I've brought this up, some people kind of say, yeah, but I remember you being on Dr. Phil years ago. And Dr. Phil said to you, would you call this person a loose woman? And I responded with, well, she's wearing the uniform of one. And a lot of people laughed and shocked like that. And they say, well, Jason, you're not showing enough empathy there. And okay, granted, that is an example of me perhaps being a bit mean. Though in my defense, I was being framed and having my words twisted to make it sound as though I endorsed rape, which is a very vicious, nasty accusation, a fallacious statement to throw at me. So my comments were very much on the defensive. Other people were not showing empathy for me or my position or trying to see things from my perspective, but rather trying to force how they wanted to see me onto me, to make it easier to mock me and attack me. So I don't really feel any guilt for that comment at all. But yeah, empathy though it's an intellectual exercise, and it's a very serious intellectual exercise, because empathy at its core requires believing things that you don't believe to be true. So if you want to imagine a men's rights activist and a feminist. They have very different beliefs. And it's very hard for a feminist or for a men's rights activist to imagine what it's like to be the other and to see the world from the other person's perspective. And to do that means you have to believe something that you don't believe to be true. Now, for a feminist, they might believe, well, all people are equal. Men and women are equal in every regard, strength or something, height. That I don't think all feminists believe that, but I have heard some say that. And it might be really hard for them to go, oh, I believe men and women are different and men are stronger or superior. Because they'll immediately go, well, that's not what I believe, that's not who I am. And they get very angry and upset about it. And but if they can discipline themselves to go like, well, what if I did think that men and women weren't equal? And they entertain that idea, they could then step into the shoes of a men's rights activist. And likewise, the same thing for a men's rights activist, that if he could imagine, okay, well, what if I imagined that women were equal? They could step into the shoes of a feminist. And if you can do that, if you can use the other person's argument, see it as they do, then you have achieved you're doing something very mature. You're being very self-controlled, you're being open-minded, and when you then go to have a conversation with that person, it doesn't turn into, oh, you're the devil, you're evil, I hate you, you hate me, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. It turns into that fight. You can actually have a productive conversation. You can talk about, well, I can see why you want these things. And they can go, look, well, I can see why you'd want these kind of policies and laws in place. And you reach agreement, and you can have a win-win situation when you do that. But if you can't have empathy, or one person can't have empathy, it's really important that both people have empathy. It can't be a one-way street, and it's really bad if neither side has empathy. So, because if neither side has empathy, they both try to kill each other. It's just a war for survival, and it's just tribal warfare, rule the jungle, try to kill each other. Because they can't negotiate, because they can't reach a compromise or work away a deal that helps both of them get what they want. It has to be, one group has to be destroyed when there's no empathy. And as you can see, that might be very dangerous in a personal relationship, romantic relationship, friendship. If you kind of decide, oh, well, I can't connect, I can't see this other person's point of view, they have to be destroyed, they have to go, cut them out of my life, get rid of them. And so having empathy means you can actually have, well, friendships, relationships, you can have society, civilization. You can have those things if you have empathy. And if one person has empathy and the other person doesn't have empathy, you have a problem, because the person who lacks empathy will eventually dominate and force the other person into submission and slavery. And so it's really important that we've got people that lack empathy. We have to take away their freedoms. We have to restrict their movements and stop them from doing the things that they would like to do. Now, that might sound on the surface like, you sound really extreme, Jason. You're talking about taking away a person's freedom. But it's actually really commonplace, and you just probably haven't thought about it like this before. But take a murderer. They don't have empathy. If they had empathy, they wouldn't kill people. And we recognize, okay, murderers don't have empathy, so we lock them up. We take away their freedom. We take away their rights. We say, we are not going to treat you like everyone else. You are not equal. You are not the same to us. We are not treating you the same way because you lack empathy. That's what it comes down to. And because a murderer lacks empathy, they can't be trusted. We can't leave them free to do what they want because they could kill someone else. And we treat rapists the same, and armed robbers, and all sorts of people, liars, fraudsters and stuff like that. We treat them like this. We recognize that we can't tolerate you having your freedom because you lack empathy for other people, and that makes you dangerous. We also do this with children, interesting enough, because we recognize that children don't have the empathy to make responsible decisions. So we don't let children drive cars because we know that children, they're not capable of being responsible enough to look after the car or responsible to drive the car properly. And so we restrict the freedoms of children until they're old enough to have, or cognitively developed enough to have empathy to make responsible decisions. And so what we call empathy and responsibility is actually really the same thing. And yeah, trying to put yourself in a child's shoes when you're an adult, and it's really hard. And it's a very difficult intellectual process. You have to really change your way of looking at the world, and still maintain your own perspective to keep your sense of self. But it's something that doesn't seem to be that common, and I do not see it all in any of the comments I was reading on this video, because especially the people didn't even understand why she was upset, and I should probably explain why I could sympathize with her. And now, the day before I saw this, I just read about how 3 New York cops had got a drink from somewhere and had been poisoned with bleach, and they were hospitalized for it. And the news for the last couple of weeks has just been cops bad, cops bad, cops bad, defund the police, defund the police. That's just what the news cycle has been for the last 2 weeks. And I thought to myself, well, imagine being a cop. Now, cops and therapists kind of have something in common. We both believe our work helps the community, and we choose our occupations to help the community. So I can immediately connect with a cop and say, yes, I chose a job where I want to help other people, just as a cop did. Oh, a policeman. I'm sorry, I keep using cop. I don't know if it's pejorative or anything like that, but anyway, sorry if it is. I don't mean it that way. So they chose to join the police force out of a sense they wanted to help other people. And then they get told by the people that they care about that they're horrible, and they don't want them, and they want them to lose their job. They want them to lose their income and be poor and destitute or something like that. Presumably, I don't even think they've even thought about the consequences of defunding the police force on the police, because they don't have that much empathy, or they're not showing that much empathy. So this is someone who cares about others, being told by those others that they don't care about them back. And that hits really hard. And then on top of that, being told, that some people out there are trying to kill cops by poisoning them with bleach. And so when I heard that, she'd waited 20 minutes for a coffee, then refused a coffee, I thought that was immediate. That's what I thought she meant immediately. I still think that's what she meant, but, correct me if I'm wrong, she meant something else, and she's made another video explaining what she actually meant, but that's what I understood what she meant, and I instantly felt sympathy for her, because I imagine, what if there was this, we all hate therapists, and people were trying to poison therapists? Well, it'd be a very dark, miserable place to be in, and I'm like, oh my god, that poor woman, that poor policewoman is in a really difficult situation, and damn it, I would cry too. I would cry too in that situation. It's really rough. But then, all these people there's some failure, inability, unwillingness to empathize, and it's a serious problem, because if a lot of people don't empathize, or a majority of people don't empathize, we will lose civilization, because either we just break down into these warring tribes that start killing each other, this massive war, a civil war going on, or what will happen is that the whole society will turn into a massive prison, a totalitarian police state, because no one can be trusted. There's no trust at all. And when there's no trust, there's no freedom at all. Everyone will be monitoring, watching everyone else, dobbing each other in. That will be the future in a society that doesn't have empathy. And so if we consider it to be cool to lack empathy, to burn bridges, to cut people out of our lives, to attack them verbally, viciously, without any thought about how that might impact them personally, we are going to create this police state. That is what is going to happen. That is going to be the end result of this social trend to thinking that empathy isn't cool. When empathy is something that is very admirable, very civilized, and should definitely be respected. And if you want to try and fix this situation, I would invite you to try and spend some time thinking about what it might be like to be a police officer. Imagine a job, because a lot of people don't think about this, but there's a lot of fatal car accidents every year. And police have to go out to every fatal car accident there is, and they have to look at the grisly mess of body parts and blood and spattered remains out there, and they have to write a report, take photos, and they may need to have to talk about it in court, perhaps, or they have to even tell the families of the people who died, and they've got these images in their head of these appalling ways that people have died horrendously. And because traffic accidents are common, that is just part of a policeman's job. That's just something they're going to do eventually. It's always going to happen. So for most people, I don't think you can imagine that. I don't think you can imagine looking at these blood-splattered bodies torn to pieces and having to tell the families about what happened and how they died. That's a really difficult job. That's really draining, exhausting. A lot of people who have jobs like this, they can't talk to their spouses about it. They can't say oh my God, I saw a child ripped to pieces by a killer today. They can't talk about that because no one wants to hear that. And it's really hard to be there and listen to someone who's been through that experience. And that's very isolating, very lonely. And that's a very difficult thing that cops have to live with. And that's part of their job. And if you take on such a highly exhausting, draining occupation like that, and you do it because you care about other people, and I do believe that most police, they do become police because they care about people. I mean, sure, there's probably a few psychopaths out there, but most of them do take on this job because they see it as a personal sacrifice because they love other people so much that they take on that sacrifice of doing the dirty job nobody else wants to do. And and they also have other things. Imagine there's a lot of cases where people make false accusations. The common one that people usually know about is a false rape accusation. Imagine being a cop and you're interviewing what you think is a rape victim, but you think, well, maybe they're not a rape victim. And you're in this difficult situation where if you make the wrong call, whether to believe them or not, can have huge impacts. Either it will very much hurt a real victim, or it will hurt someone who's completely innocent. Actually, it's probably the same. The real victim in both cases. If you make the wrong call, that's what's going to happen. And that is a really stressful responsibility to have. That's a huge responsibility to have on your shoulders. So do you really actually want to be a cop? It's really hard. And I think if you take some time to think about what they have to go through, it's a really tough thing. Now, I get it. There's a lot of reasons to criticize the police, and I'm sure I share most of those criticisms, and they're mostly to do with who do they actually serve, Do they serve the people? Do they serve whoever's in power? And who's paying them? Should it be the state paying them, or should people pay them directly? And they are very important issues, but at the end of the day, the job remains the same, and it's a really difficult job to do. And it's a job, I think, that we need. I think it's a valid occupation, policing. Even though some of the things they do may not be particularly valid. But that's a whole other issue. I think, if we have empathy for them and they have empathy for us, that solves a lot of these problems. You get good policing if you can connect with what they have to do and they connect with what you need to do with your life, and they see your situation and so on. You don't even need laws in that case. If you've got that mutual empathy and understanding, you can solve all your own problems without having to use laws. And that's a great thing about empathy, is that empathy's, if everyone has empathy, it doesn't matter what system of government you have or what power structures you have. If everyone has empathy, and it's genuine empathy, people will do the right thing regardless of what the rules say, because they'll know the right thing to do, because they can negotiate with other people and see their needs and balance them out and be considerate. And so I always think, if you want to live in this really happy society that doesn't so much have laws but just has really good moral people, then you should work on cultivating your empathy. You should work on being more understanding, being able to see other perspectives than your own, and not getting caught up with they're evil and I'm good and I never do anything wrong, but actually take a much more nuanced view of life. And you can do this now. You can just find someone you disagree with. I used the example of a men's rights activist and a feminist before, and maybe you could have a conservative and a Black Lives Matter person, and they talk to each other. And I mean talk, they are not yell and attack each other, but actually listen to what the other person's saying, repeat back their arguments, and then try to imagine, if you were them, how you might feel or how you might see the other person. Because that's not an easy thing to do. I'm not asking you to do anything easy with that, but it's a really challenging thing. And you start to appreciate just how difficult empathy is when you try this, and you kind of go, oh, it's a bit hard to actually see that person's point of view. But the rewards are huge, because you can then have a conversation with that person. You don't have to be at conflict with them. You don't have to fight all the time. You don't have to, and with, interestingly enough, with Antifa, and there's a lot of Antifa hate around there, but I have come across people with Antifa, I've spoken to them. They're very unhappy people. They're very miserable. There's a lot of things in their lives that are not going well, and a lot of people don't understand. They don't hear them. They don't hear where they're coming from. And it would be really good for them to be able to talk to someone, to talk about what they're going through, what they're struggling with, and have someone listen to them and actually understand them, and not try to condemn them. Because when this happens, it's like imagine. I think of empathy it really improves your imagination, because suddenly you can think of so many ways you can solve your problems, so many ways you can resolve your disputes, and they're often win-win. And you learn something new, you can grow as a person, and they grow, you both grow, everyone grows, and we're all happier for it. But if you don't, you never see this. It's never seen. You don't know what you're missing out on. And another thing is that if you're one of those people who made one of these comments about this policewoman, I think maybe take a few minutes and think about what I was saying about, well, how would you feel if your profession was being attacked and in the press, and people were demanding that you lose your job, and people were poisoning people in your profession? How you might feel if you were in her situation. Would you still make that same comment about her and what she was going through? And so, yeah, I think that's it. Now, please like, share, and subscribe. Apparently, it's really important that I tell you that and remind you that. And it really helps. And until next time, per spera ad astra.